So I'm going to explain to you guys something that some guys just don't quite understand when I talk to them about using your car as a daily driver. And basically, it's the difference between back in the 80s, I drove one of these, a 62 Bug was my daily driver car, and I had a 57 Combi Bus was my truck. Okay, and so people say, "Oh, you're not a VW person because you don't drive one daily today." I'm going to talk to you about the difference between driving back then and driving now. And the first thing I'm going to touch on is that there was about, I don't know, maybe a third of as many cars on the road back then as there was today. So there was a lot less cars on the road. For you guys that don't know that, didn't know because you weren't alive back then. Maybe you're looking at using one of those daily drivers today. Let's talk about the differences real quick. So yeah, there was about a third as many cars on the road. The other thing is that more commonly on the road back in the early days, it was expected to see a car stopped on the freeway more often, that was broke down for some reason or something. It was a lot more often. You'd be driving down the road and all of a sudden, oh, there's a car and another one stops. So it was more thing that was expected. Um, or a guy in his VW that couldn't reach a reserve switch, and he, stopped on the freeway to turn it on, and it was just more often that you noticed that. Um, Back then, people drove. They didn't drive nearly as fast as they do today. Um, Even though the speed limit was lower, even back before then, because I was alive and riding in a car back in the 60s too, when these cars were near new. Um, Even back in those days, not as many people drove as fast. And the reason why they didn't is because the cars back then, when you went 70 in your VW or your car, you really felt like you're going 70. In the newer cars today, you don't feel like you're going 70. You feel like it feels the same between going 50 and 90 or 100. It doesn't, they have such better technology, and the suspension is so much smoother, and aerodynamics, all kinds of things, and front end geometry. I mean, there's just a million things that are way better about the newer cars. So, and this happened around the 90s on up. The mid to late 90s on up, we started noticing people driving a lot faster on the road. And it wasn't just because the speed limits went higher again. It was because the cars were engineered to drive faster and be more efficient. So because people don't feel the car reaching speeds that are unsafe, and this is the other cars that are on, not the old Volkswagen, but the other people on the road who are you're mostly worried about. Like a lot of guys say, defensive driving is number one. You can only be so defensive because other people can be pretty reckless. I've seen several people, way more often, people that are more reckless today than they were back then because they just couldn't be. Their cars just didn't go as fast. They didn't handle as well. So those are some of the reasons that I don't recommend people driving as a daily driver, as a primary vehicle. I mean, I use my cars. They're not just sitting here all the time. I drive them all the time, but I drive them when it's good for the car. So my car dictates when I should drive it. Not me just going, oh, I'm in an emergency. I need to run to the bank real fast and haul ass down the road in my old classic car. I'll take the other car. There's no reason for me to take the VW and be in a hurry like that. So that's why we say have two cars. If you're going to have a VW as a primary vehicle or as a daily driver, you should always have another car that you're driving. So the reason I was saying about being stopped in the road is VWs are prone to breaking. Throttle cables, people go, oh, well, you upgrade everything, you make it really good, and then it doesn't break down like well, no, it's not exactly that way, guys. Your old VW is still an old VW, and, throttle cable can break, the clutch cable can break, they wear out, the quality of the parts is nothing. And believe me, I drove these things back in the 80s. I bought parts, I rebuilt my own engines, I've done all the work on these cars since back then. The quality of the parts today totally suck compared to the stuff we had back then. So, more often you're going to have parts that are going to fail. And if you're on the freeway and you break down and you're stuck in the middle of the road, people are not ready to see that. So what happens is somebody will run into you because they just don't expect to see a car stopped on the road like they used to. For instance, when I drove in traffic in the heat, okay, it was common on a hot day when it was 105 degrees to see the side of the road lined up with cars with the hood up. Lined up, just tons of cars with the hood up on the side of the road in traffic. And it wasn't because, they would just run hot, older cars. They just didn't have the cooling systems that they have today on the cars with the electric fans that are monitoring. I mean, my Jetta TDI basically it can run without, the engine is such a technology that it almost will run with no coolant. I think it only takes like 3 quarts of coolant or something like that. So they're way more efficient than they used to be back in the early days. So it was often that the other people on the road were used to seeing broke down cars. Today, very, very few people see it. It just doesn't happen. It's about 1 in 100 as many cars that were broke down on the side of the road as there used to be. So those are some of the safety things that you could say, hey, I can be a defensive driver. I can do all the things in the world to defend myself when I'm driving my VW. But those are some of the reasons that it's just not the same as it was back in the early days of the car. Another thing that, nobody's talked about again is when you're driving in the rain in a VW, they say, oh, well, you just put the no fog on the windows. I used to do that. Okay. I know exactly what that's like. It's not like having a car with clear windows. You still can't see out the window nearly as well as you can in a newer car. So you're not able to defend yourself as well in the rain in your old VW. The other thing is the disc brake systems and the upgraded disc brake systems that you get for your VW versus a car that was engineered specifically to meet the new safety standards. Okay, you upgrade your car, your old VW, to disc brakes, which I highly recommend. But especially if you're going to drive it as a daily driver at all. But they say, well, it'll stop as good as my Jetta. Well, I'll tell you right now, you get behind me in your Bug with your great disc brakes and try and stop as fast as my car, you will run into the back of me for sure. There's no doubt about it. So let me just talk about that for a second, because you got a backyard guy who engineered and designed the disc brake upgrade systems for these cars, and half of them, the MP ones, they don't even work in the rear. There's issues with the disc brake, with the e-brake not working. If you get the e-brake kit, and you're comparing that to a newer car that has, a team of engineers that are being well paid to figure out how to make them stop faster with an ABS system, with all the, with the technology that's put into the braking systems today. I mean, like my Jetta, for instance, in the 80s, the disc brake system in a car, the front brake pads would wear out first. On my Jetta, the rear brakes wear out first. And it's because the proportioning system inside the car puts more braking power to the rear in the first part so that it keeps you going straight, and then it starts to brake to the front. Versus the old technology, even in like a Buick or whatever, was always the front because most of your braking power was in the front of the car. But they figured out that if the rear brakes harder first and then it goes to the front, then it goes back to the rear, that the car will actually stop faster. Those are all things that they don't put on the VW upgrades that you buy, from parts stores for upgrade. You can put the 4-piston calipers and all that on there. You're still not nearly as well engineered as a newer car is. So those are all things that come to play when you're trying to drive as a daily driver. So I'm going to explain to you real quick how a friend of mine drives his VW as a daily driver, and this is his only car, but he does have a truck. So he drives his truck, to do his work. Okay, so he doesn't drive his VW every day on the freeway commuting back and forth to work. Okay, so what he does is he has a tree business, and he goes out and he does estimates in his VW at times when he doesn't just get up at 7 o'clock in the morning, go out, compete with all the traffic, and go to an estimate. He waits till 9, and he goes out and does his estimate. Okay, then he goes out in his work truck and he does his work. He dumps his truck and he drives home. So he's not driving. He revolves his life around his VW, not his VW fitting into his life. His life revolves around his VW as his daily driver. And that's how he's able to do it. So, for instance, if he goes to Arizona, goes to visit his family in Arizona from California, he goes at night. Other people go, what the hell? Why would you go at night? There's less cars. Reasons you talk to him. The reasons he goes at night is there's less cars on the road. It's not as hard on the engine because it's not running as hot at nighttime. It's cooler at night. And even in the winter, he does it at night. He has 300,000 miles he's put on his car in 12 years. So this guy drives a lot, but his driving is done in opportune times. So it's still his primary car. I mean, he uses it more than he doesn't. You ask him, do you use your truck? Hell no. He goes, I don't want to drive my truck. I drive my bug. But his life revolves around his bug. He doesn't have any kids, He works on his car all the time. He's constantly working on it. He says, I'm always under there doing something, adjusting his valves, adjusting his brakes. He keeps everything up to the date because he can take a day off work to do it. He can say, oh, I won't schedule any work tomorrow because I got to work on the bug, so I'm going to do this and do that and do everything. Well, if you have a regular job, you can't do that. So unrealistic thinking is thinking that you can drive one as your daily driver and not have, and have a, some kind of a Uber lifestyle by driving an old bug. I mean, I'm not saying don't drive it. I love my old bugs. I love driving them. They're fun to drive. But I drive them when I know I'm going to have fun driving it. I don't want to get in it and jump in traffic and be in a hurry and drive the old bug and push it too hard. I'd rather drive it when I can enjoy the car, So a key to having a successful old classic car is having something else to drive as well. It's not because you don't care about your old car or anything like that. It's all about because you care about your old car, you want to have respect for it to be preserved and driven and not just be wasted into a life that you're trying to put it into. Respect the car, and then doing what is good for the car is what I'm talking about. Not, fitting it into your life, putting your car, yourself into your car's life, and then working it that way. And that's how that he runs his life, and that's how he's able to do it as a daily driver. So anyway, if you're able to do that, and able to revolve your life around your car, then use it as a daily driver. You know, respect it, and don't take it out when the ice is on the road, you know, or when if you take the day off. If you can't do that, then don't use a VW as your daily driver. Use it as, you know, don't use it as a time. Use it as a time when you can be aware and can do the right thing for the car. So anyway, those are just a couple of pointers. Then again, like I said, I have been a daily driver VW person. I was for many, many years. Today, it just doesn't work out for me, and and I'm just trying to tell you guys so that if you're thinking, hey, you know, I'm just going to go for it, I'm going to use my VW as my daily driver, just things to think about before you do it. All right, so I'll talk to you in the next video. Please like, share, and subscribe.